So just posted in the Tome Show Discord that we are live. We are live. Whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's why. So in Discord, you just I tagged at everyone. I tagged at everyone. So. So we they say
I was just saying it's a good.
They say you're muted.
Does,
You're
and,
muted,
and,
Jeff. This
yeah,
happens
one of
every
these times,
time.
and it's really easy to fix. And there it is. Now it's fixed. So you'd think that one of these times I would remember to do it ahead of time, but no, I am not smart enough to remember to do it ahead of time.
Tracy, can you say something?
I'm saying something.
Jared, can you say something?
Hello.
Because he said he can only hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, now he says he hears everybody. Okay, awesome.
Thank you. Steal your mind. I assume the stream is working. It went to black screen on mine. So. Okay, good. Which is weird that it would go to. Well, I know the chat's running.
That's how what I do is.
Right.
On the side, so if I need to say something, we're
on
there.
No, I usually have it open just so I can watch the chat, but I paused the audio so I don't have any extra bandwidth. Apparently, you're skipping.
So, yeah, apparently I have an echo and I'm skipping.
There were echo issues before, but I should have fixed that by now.
He just said it just now, so.
Yeah, I saw. Thank you, Ish. So the echo is fixed. I'm not hearing the skipping on my end, so I don't know what that's about.
You never do, but it sometimes does come through in the final when I edit.
Which is weird because what's coming through on my end should be what gets recorded, but
I know. But
I'm not gonna try to make sense of it. Okay, it sounds like you were good there. And it says I'm not dropping frames, but it also says OBS is having issues with encoding, keeping up, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, that sucks. Well, that probably
maybe, but it's not dropping any frames, so I don't know.
Yeah. Some friends of mine were streaming earlier today, and they were having all sorts of problems. They ended up having to stream.
Well, as much as I really enjoy having people in the stream and the chat and all that, if we have to record without streaming, we did it for 13, 14 years. We can do it again. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
Quick question, Jeff. Is it 341 or 441?
I believe it's 441. No, yeah, you're right. 341.
331. 341.
All right. Yeah, you had 341 in the title, but 441 everywhere else. So.
I did mention I threw this together like 15 minutes before, right?
I throw no one under the bus. There just happened to be a bus.
She looked off to the side, and suddenly it was there.
I think Fred's watching us now, too. Say hi to Fred. Oh, there he is. Is he eating up bandwidth and slowing down your connection, Tracy?
No, because he's not here. He's been working in Mass.
Okay. He assures me that in the chat that is not the case. Okay, good. All right. Well, it looks like you've got the script open, Trace, and everybody's here, and the stream is moving smoothly enough. Should I go ahead and hit record and get this thing going?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. And I'm recording. And hopefully, okay. My computer got a little laggy there for a second, but I've been letting my kids on the computer a lot over the summer, so who knows what has been installed on here recently. So I need to do a purge at some point. All right. So we're recording. Are you ready?
Do it.
All right. This episode of The Tome Show is brought to you by Skull Splitter Dice. Go to skullsplitterdice.com and use the coupon code TOMESHOW, all lowercase letters, for 15% off your first order. And by listeners like you, thanks for using the Tomes, Amazon, and DM's Guild affiliate links, and for being patrons at patreon.com/thetomeshow. Welcome to The Tome, a D&D news, reviews, and interviews show, and I'm your Tome host, Jeff Greiner.
And I'm Tracy Hurley, and in this episode, number 341, we're going to go shopping.
Woo!
As we talk about the decisions we make as players to decide what to buy and what not to buy, in hopes it helps you decide on your own gaming priorities. And joining us for this episode are two people who I suspect would tell us they failed to prioritize their gaming shopping more than they succeeded, but they have some hard-earned wisdom to share as a result. First up, Tome Show regular, our senior editor, producer, behind the DM screen co-host, and DM for D&D Brief, Sam Dillon. Welcome.
Hello. And just so everyone knows, Tracy is just throwing out the buses. Just zoomed right over.
In fairness, I wrote the script that she just read, so I might have thrown that bus out there.
Jeff is just throwing out the buses tonight. It's just amazing.
I didn't have to throw him under the bus, so it's good. Next, Rosher. Sorry, what did you write?
There, that should fix it. I just added one extra word.
All right, he writes for Gnome Stew, a gaming site that's been around since the golden age, like us, and you can find his own website and blog at whatdoiknowjr.com. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be on the show for my first time here.
I'm excited to have you on as well. We've been chatting back and forth, and you've been interacting with the show on Twitter and what have you for a long time. So.
Oh yeah, I've been listening for years, so it's nice to be on here. Finally.
I do want to remind folks that if you want to see the Tome Show recordings live and unedited, and as Fred put it in the chat, see all how the sausage gets made, and sometimes it's pretty, and sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it's embarrassing, but here we are. We stream a lot of our recordings at twitch.tv/tomeshow. And then a few weeks later, the video gets posted up on YouTube, so you can find it there, still completely unedited as well. So, and I also want to mention that we are sponsored right now by Skull Splitter Dice. You can use the coupon code TOMESHOW for 15% off if you're a new customer. But more importantly, you can also just win a bunch of stuff for free from Skull Splitter Dice by this month. And this month is almost over, so if you're in the chat on the stream, this is really pertinent to you. You need to go over to Twitter and follow the Tome Show on Twitter, and there are instructions there that have been retweeted throughout the month, but were originally tweeted on the 1st of the month, that give you instructions, really simple. It shouldn't take you more than 2 minutes, unless you really get into looking at fun dice on Skull Splitter's website, about how to enter and win just a load of stuff. If you're listening to the audio of this and don't have time to get to Twitter, because I suspect that this won't be edited and released until next month, into July, you probably want to go over to our Facebook page for the Tome Show, and that'll be relevant for you in July. And just in case you wanted to think ahead of time, this will be going on a total of 4 times, this contest. Each one I'm going to run a different sort of Tome Show place. So if you wanted to make sure to be hanging out with us on Discord or following us on Twitch or any of those kinds of things, that would be a great way to keep up with what we're doing. And those might be places where you could enter to win later on. I haven't quite decided those last 2 months worth of contest winners yet, but get a preemptive head start on those kinds of things and you'll be good to go.
Awesome. So now on to the episode where we are figuring out how to decide what to buy. I'm realizing we probably should have gotten Shelley. Which books we should pick up, which dice, which Kickstarters to back, how to pick something on DM's Guild. And so let's figure out, see if we can find a good system to prioritize our shopping so Jeff doesn't have to explain a certain credit card bill anymore.
I think that's fair. Yeah, absolutely. This is a tricky topic, and I'm not entirely sure that there are universal truths to be had here, right? I think to a degree everybody has to figure out their own priorities and set their own budgets and what have you. But here we are. We're going to talk through sort of our thinking on the subject, and hopefully that's helpful for other people to help contemplate and think about their own sort of priorities and their own budgeting. So I guess it's worth talking about, as an introduction here, what is everybody's sort of gaming shopping habits? Like, what are you buying a lot of? Where are you shopping a lot? Let's talk about that a little bit. Who wants to get us started?
Well, you can.
Sam buys very, very little.
So Jeff asked this question. He said, how do you decide what to buy or what, something like that? Much better. I said, well, it has to be a great reference and have usable, content or something like that. And he said, yeah, that's kind of what everybody's saying, but I think the disagreement would be about what makes it a great reference or what qualifies as a great reference and what's usable. So I do agree that maybe there's no universal, you said there's kind of no universal. I think there actually is a universal, but the thing is, and, different people have different desires and needs about what they think is important. And so that's kind of what we're here to talk about. In terms of what I buy, where I buy it, oh, geez. I mean, I know it doesn't look like it, but I've actually slowed down my buying quite a bit in the past. In fact, I was saying on the Discord the other day that, 5th edition, or maybe it wasn't, anyway, it was a conversation somewhere. 5th edition is one of the only D&D editions that when I'm actively playing it, most other D&D editions that I play and other games as well, if I play the game, I'm kind of a collector. I get as much stuff as I can. And that's a little easier for me nowadays because I'm a little older, I have a stable job, and I have a little bit of disposable income. It was harder when I was younger, but I still tried to do it. It kind of shows the shift in my thinking as I'm kind of now over that phase where I have to have everything, and I'm moving into a phase where I'm a little more discriminating. So, but where do I buy things? Anywhere.
So
anywhere. I mean, I don't have a specific I only buy things from this one place. So
you're not, and it's for a couple things. I have follow-ups because of course I do. First of all, I find it ironic that 5th edition is the first edition where you're not buying everything, because 5th edition is arguably the easiest edition for that to indulge in that collector side. Like it doesn't have nearly the collection of stuff to buy as the previous editions. That's not a question, I guess it's a comment. But but then outside of just the official WotC books, are you buying anything else? Are you still picking up miniatures or dice? Or are you backing Kickstarters or other crowdfunded things, or what, third party stuff?
About 3-4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now, I sold my entire minis collection. It was 1,500, 1,600 miniatures, and all of my Dwarven Forge, and all of my other three-dimensional terrain. And I replaced it with just a few sets of like tokens, round tokens, not even like ones that stand up. And I'm perfectly happy with that. I have paper maps now. I use vinyl maps that I have from way back when. I have not bought more of those. I use Chessex mat that I can draw on using a wet erase marker. And I do a lot of Theater of the Mind. And that's it. So I do not purchase minis at all. I salivate over the Dwarven Forge Kickstarters and the really great miniatures Kickstarters, but then I close it and I don't back them because when I made the decision to sell my collection, I said I can only sell this if I'm never going to do this again. Because if I'm ever going to get back into minis again, I can't sell these because that would be really stupid. Because I didn't sell it because I needed the money. I sold it because I was making an intentional decision to not mess with miniatures, to replace miniatures with cardboard tokens and not have the plastic and the needing the storage and having the 3D terrain and all that stuff. I made the conscious choice.
So you made a decision to
it was
find
I made a decision.
Different priorities about what you were going to have in your collection or not.
Right.
So you've gone from the collector mindset to the more discriminating sort of weigh your options.
Right. So I started with a lot of stuff, and I started by getting rid of the miniatures. Then I sold the Dwarven Forge and other terrain, and then I started selling other types of things. I sold a bunch of the dice that I had that I just wasn't using. I sold some other tchotchkes and different stuff, and when I back a Kickstarter, I back it. I don't back it for the swag. I back it for whatever the book product is, because I'm not going to use the swag and I don't want it hanging around. And I have already made that reduce the amount. Right? I'm not saying I don't buy anything. I'm not trying to pretend, but I buy books because I consume books. Whereas sometimes if I get something that has a miniature, well, that miniature might sit on my shelf and I never ever touch it. And what's the point of that, right? So that's part of my decision also about buying books and backing Kickstarters now is, am I going to use it? If I have a reasonable likelihood of using it, I'll back it. If I just don't back it anymore.
Okay. And I think we want to come back through and dig into each of these categories in more depth as later on as we go through. But let's go through and hear a little bit from Jared. What's your sort of buying habits as a gamer?
Well, part of what I ended up doing now, since I'm doing the reviews on Gnome Stew and on my site, is I tend to prioritize things a little bit differently than I used to. So now the first thing that I look for is I look for things that haven't been done before or currently oversaturated. Was Haunted West, Chris Spivey. Support that game. So I will support games like that. I will buy things that jump out at me like that. I just based games, necessarily things that people always see, so that I see a wider range of things. Because part of what I want to do, especially when I do the reviews on Gnome Stew, is to try and look for things that people may not realize are out there and say, this is really great. Look at this. This is something that, this is a direction that gaming can go that maybe isn't something that you would necessarily think of, especially if you have been playing traditional RPGs in this for a long period. I tend to look for, I know that I want to, just people that I either really respect or people that I literally know. Like, I really wanted to back Seas of Adari because I know Brandon. A lot of things that I'm very happy with a lot of the design work that I've seen him do. And then after that is when I tend to prioritize things like, okay, now that I bought, this thing to review that's kind of new and I've supported somebody else, then I fall into, well, have I picked up the latest D&D book yet? And I still reflexively kind of do that. So, I mean, it's still a thing that I do, but my priorities, that kind of falls in last now, even though I've still managed the thing that has been put out by 5th edition so far this time.
Okay.
Is like Sam, I also got rid of all of my miniatures and like my bazillion Paizo flip maps that I had with all the different terrain, and I literally just have a board that I write on, and I got these tactical tokens, which are dry erase tokens. So whenever I do something tactically, because I would obsess over having the right miniature, and I know it's not something you have to do, it's something I could not force myself not to do. Like when I was running Paizo Adventure Pass, I would literally look up online and order exactly the right miniatures for different encounters sometimes, and it was ridiculous.
It has an addiction aspect to it because if you've got, I had this huge undead army and I also had a huge like orc army. And so I always had enough orcs and enough skeletons and enough zombies, but enough gnolls, right? Like I always, for some reason, was short of a gnoll, or I never had enough, beholders. I had one or something, right? So like there's always, oh, I want to do this really cool encounter. Oh, now I got to go buy that miniature because I need to have, so yeah, there's a completionist aspect to that is almost impossible to meet because new adventures come out all the time that have a different setup and a different grouping of creatures.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I think that is not an unfamiliar compulsion within the industry, within the community, right? I think there's a lot of people who have that compulsion.
Sure.
I've been trying to. I've been waiting for one of those companies that does the flat plastic minis to start doing like the, hey, here's everything you need for this adventure, right? Here's our entire Curse of Strahd line, and you'll have every miniature you need for Curse of Strahd and whatever. I have a
does the flat plastic miniatures. They actually did that for Lost Mines.
They did, yes. I saw that. So I'm hoping that does well and picks up. So, all right, Tracy.
It's sort of that adventure in a box, and have it come with every miniature and every map that was needed. Like a great idea that people will buy it, but unfortunately, it's almost cost prohibitive. So, oftentimes, it's a great idea that doesn't actually fare well in the marketplace.
And that's what I'm hoping is that it does do well in the marketplace because it's cheaper than what the two of you were doing, trying to get every single mini, So,
right.
So I'd be all about that. But Tracy, let's talk about your shopping habits.
So like Sam, I had an issue, or still have an issue. Just money, trying to find thing, or in particular supporting designers from marginalized groups, to help make sure, one, to get myself exposed to what they're producing, but also help make sure that they can keep producing it. And in particular with Kickstarters, I love it when they offer the buy one and we'll provide one to someone else who maybe can't afford the product themselves, or they donate it to schools and stuff. So I often will do those things. And then a lot of times it's more like, I rarely, so it's more, inspiration or things that I can pull out artwork, stuff like that, which is really funny because, well, to me, because originally when I started playing, I was always the artwork is the least important part of the purchase, and now I've shifted more to where artwork is important, in part because done well, it can combat that idea that the default is whatever is the status quo in our society, and things like that. So I think that's probably most of it. I back a lot of Patreons too. I'll probably I'd love to do more. Just right now, we just have some stuff going on where I don't want to commit too much money, and I don't want to have to pull it from a creator.
Right. And I think that's part of where my inspiration for doing this episode came from was, people are on ever increasing budgets in the midst of a pandemic, right? And figuring out what they're going to buy and what they're not going to buy. And there is a lot of people. I sometimes before we do these episodes, I fish a little bit on Twitter, and I start asking some pointed questions over the course of a week or two, and sort of see, take some temperature, and also maybe see if anybody has particularly insightful responses, and then I invite Jared to come on the episode. It was the responses I got on Twitter were pretty split between the completionist, I just buy everything, and the I don't buy hardly anything unless it seems particularly interesting and relevant to me. And I don't think a single person really told me much about what seemed interesting or relevant to them. But that's sort of where the community, at least from the incredibly not representative sample of people that responded to a couple of Twitter questions, that's where a lot of people seem to be. And I would guess that there's more people right now who have been completionists for a long time that maybe should rethink or are rethinking their decision to be completionists and being a little more discriminating about what they want to invest in and not invest in. Can I recruit? Because what I did was I actually wrote a list of the reasons why I would buy a book or other accessory. And we've said a lot of them, but let me just go down the list because I want to make a point at the end about it, and you're kind of getting there. But so here's what I said. I said I could buy a book, or people can buy a book for because it might have adventure material to steal because they want to use it in their own game. They might buy it for inspiration as a reference to some time period or some cultural reference. They might buy it to use directly at their table. In other words, run that adventure right then or use that source book right then. They might buy it to broaden their own knowledge about a particular aspect of gaming, or like we were talking about Chris Spivey's work. He's also the one that did Harlem Unbound, which is fantastic. Okay. You might buy it for the art style, which Tracy mentioned. If it has a real inspirational effect on you, it might influence the way that you conceive of your own setting if you run homebrew. You might buy it to complete a collection, to review, which also Jared mentioned. You might just buy it because it looks fun and it just struck you at that moment as, sort of what I would call an impulse buy, but obviously it had some aspect of it that it really spoke to you. You might buy it because you think your players will like it and you're not sure, and so you want to look more into it. You might buy it because you know the name of the designer, also mentioned. And you might buy it just because you love dice or you love minis or you don't already have enough to paint. Steal Your Mind mentioned in the thing that he's got way too many to paint. You might buy a mapping tool because you want to start learning how to make your own maps. You want to start learning how to do something that you haven't previously done, so you want to learn a new skill. You might buy cards because you might hope that they'll be useful at the table or something, right? So there's all these reasons why, but ultimately it comes down to if you have the money to buy it, right? And some people can get into real trouble because all of those things that I just mentioned, those are all rationalizations or reasons to buy something, right? Everything I said is a reason, yes, you should purchase that because. So one of the things that I did to sort of flip that script is instead of, when I look at a Kickstarter, instead of trying to talk myself into, oh yeah, I could use this because I could do this with it, I could do this with it, it's gonna be a great reference, and I love that designer, and it's all these reasons why I should. Instead, I approach it as, let me talk myself out of buying this.
right? And if I can't talk myself out of buying it, then I can consider that maybe it belongs on my shelf or belongs in my office. But if I'm really honest with myself, I can easily talk myself out of buying it. And a lot of times it's because of the combination of money and how useful is it really going
No,
to
and
be.
absolutely.
And so I think those two things are the two that it
Absolutely.
comes down to.
I think you're completely correct. I haven't talked about my shopping habits, I guess, yet, but
oh yeah, sorry.
that's fine.
We don't
And
care about
I
you,
care
Jeff.
very
We don't
little
care.
about me as well. That's why I have a lot of you on here,
Yeah.
because
Right.
somebody
care,
needs to
Jeff.
be an
I
expert.
care.
That's why I bring on the guests, right? No, but I am in the fortunate position at this point that I don't buy any WotC books because I get review copies of all of them. That said, I spent a decade before WotC started sending me review copies of things. I probably spent a decade buying every single thing that came out through third edition, where they were publishing 2 hardcovers a month, and plus other things, and I had third party products as well, 4th edition, and then I started getting the review copies. So if I'm being honest, if I wasn't getting the review copies, I would still be buying everything. Now, if I wasn't getting the review copies and I wasn't doing this podcast, I would not be buying everything. That's one of the things that's a little different. There are some things I buy to be a completionist because I want to be able to speak intelligently in case it comes up, as we're having these conversations and what have you, right? I honestly don't know that I would have bought, Ravnica or Theros. That the magic settings just aren't really my thing, and I don't know that I will get a lot of use out of them. But given that I'm doing the show, I would have bought them just to make sure I'm cognizant of them and aware of them. So in terms of WotC books, as long as I'm doing the podcast, I'll end up with all of them. If I wasn't doing the podcast, there's actually several I probably would have left on the shelf. I'd probably pick up the Big Adventure. I'd probably pick up most of the Big Adventures. Maybe not all of them, but most of them. And I would definitely pick up all of everything else. The Xanathars and the Mordenkainens and Sword Coast Adventurers Guide and all of that. In terms of other things, I kickstart, or crowdfund, I should say, because several of the things that I used to kickstart have now switched over to, Game On Tabletop? I've had 2 of the things that used to come out on Kickstarter, companies that used to kickstart, moved to that recently. And some of that is a little completionist of me. I continue to kickstart or back every Torg Eternity product. Even though I don't play nearly as much Torg Eternity as I want to, or as I do D&D, right? But someday, I want to be able to dive back into it, or occasionally I'll get the kids to play with me or whatever. But there's also a degree to which, and I think Sam kind of alluded to this earlier, I really like reading the books. I really like reading the adventures. I enjoy the setting. There's a lot of lore and history that I get into. So that's one thing, right? I mean, to some degree, I'm buying those as a completionist, and to some degree, I'm buying them because I just enjoy reading what's going on in that setting and in that game. And then there's other things that I will back, and it tends to either fall into the category of this looks really cool, and backing it on a crowdfunding thing seems like a cost-effective way of getting the most for my, most bang for my buck, right? I'll do that. Like I did that with Green Ronin right now has a crowdfunding campaign going on for a 5th edition update to the Book of Fiends that's being headed by Rob Schwab. I really liked the 3rd edition Book of Fiends. This is a cost-effective way for me to get the new one and make sure that it happens by backing it. And that has the added benefit of designers and publishers that I trust. Right, it has Rob Schwab and it has Green Ronin. These are people that I know that will generally produce good product, and that's one of the things as well. Like I will back. I'm wearing my Kobold Press T-shirt tonight. I will back a lot of Kobold Press stuff, whether or not I have intentions of ever getting to it or using it. But I know Kobold Press produces, generally speaking, high quality material, right? And so I know there'll be things I can pull from. Like I have not run a campaign in Midgard, but I've used the heck out of the spells and the player options from the Hero's Handbook, and there's ideas in the world book that I'm excited about, and so I'll generally back a lot of their things as well. I continue to buy dice every now and then, and I don't know that I need to, but that's not unusual, I think, for people. I think what it's been is we had a dice sponsor a few years ago, and I'm like, well, they really want to be pushing the metal dice. I'll buy a set of their metal dice with the sponsorship money they sent me, and that'll be my first set of metal dice. And then we had another dice sponsor, and I'm like, well, I could always use another set of metal dice. And now it's like, well, I've got 3 or 4 sets of metal dice now. I want to have that be my main set. I need to get all metal dice for my main set, right? And I need 1 or 2 more sets of metal dice to make that happen. And so that keeps happening, right? But it's that, once a year or so I'll pick up another set of expensive dice, but otherwise I don't jump into a lot of that kind of stuff. I already have way more dice than I need. So minis I'll buy, usually when there's a new set of minis, I'll buy like 1 or 2 boxes just to pick up a few extra things here and there and to continue to sort of supplement my collection. I inherited most of my mini collection from a player who quit playing, and so I've got a big bin of those, and so that hasn't been, and I have started getting a little bit into painting minis, but I've just been pulling out the old adventure system games like the Wrath of Ashardalon and that kind of stuff, and just pulling out those minis and painting those. So I've spent very little money on minis to paint, outside of I wanted to make sure I had a nice Strahd mini for my Curse of Strahd game, so I did buy some vampires. But I think that's more or less where I'm at, right? That's my shopping habits.
So what I'm hearing from part of this is that we should do a follow-up episode on storage of all of our gaming accoutrements.
Well, so I actually don't store, get rid of. That's my thing. But the thing is, when I say get rid of, I don't mean throw it out or even necessarily go through the hassle of selling it. Find somebody who wants it. There are lots of people who can't afford things. Like I don't own all of the 5th edition adventures, but I've read every single one of them, except I haven't finished reading Avernus yet. But I've read every single one of them, and I've taken it in perfect condition, and I either sell it or I give it to somebody. What I at first I was selling them, but I've started giving them to people because a lot of people want to play these games, they just don't have the money, or they want to get into D&D, but they've done the starter box, but they don't know what to do, and it's like, well, here, I'll give this to you. Like I'm totally okay with donating that to somebody. Or like there was a person on Twitter a couple of years ago who some really bad stuff had happened to her, and she basically couldn't buy anything for her kids for Christmas, and they had really wanted to play D&D, and so she was going to Amazon and had it her so she could wrap it and give it to her family. Because look, if somebody wants to get their kids into D&D, like that's a great way to. If I had lived closer to her, I would have gone to and met her at a location and just handed them to her, or left them so that she could come pick them up, so she's not worried about me being some kind of creeper or something, right? Like, but so I ordered them and gave. But I give my stuff away all the time. There's a website called RPG Geek that has what's called a chain of generosity, where you can list up some stuff to give away, and basically people enter it, and you do a random drawing, and then they then have to list something that they have. That's why it's a chain, right? And so, like, there's all sorts of ways to sort of get your collection down to a manageable place, rather than having to store everything.
Right.
Says
I am looking at walls of books around you, but yes.
and I think that's totally fair too. But I just even mean, like, what is a good way to store dice? Not saying that you keep all the dice,
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
But I like a lot of
and
dice.
Sam has been on
Yeah,
this talking point.
That's
Right,
exactly
there you
what mine looks like.
Sam has been on this talking point for several years now, because we did a year or two ago. We did a sort of streaming, cutting down your simplifying your gaming life, and when you had first gone through this, and we talked about this at some length at that point. So I'm not there. I have not simplified my gaming life, and I don't know that I intend to. It still brings me joy. So there, take that, Marie Kondo.
I was gonna say.
Well, no. Look,
I was gonna bring up
you,
KonMari.
yeah, you can talk about Marie Kondo all you want. Like I love her, right? But I think that it's a personal. Like I said, gaming is personal, right? This is like 40 years almost worth of collecting, right? This is 35 years worth of collecting, and this is with a lot of cold things already out and given away or sold or gotten rid of in some respect, giving to a friend or whatever. And so that's also where my perspective comes in too. I've been gathering stuff for a really long time, and at some point I just kind of looked around and said, I just don't need all of this stuff. But at first it was just to sort of cleanse, right? But now I even apply that to buying new stuff, right? Like, do I really need it? And if I do, then fine. I'm not guilt tripping somebody, right? And I love dice too, and I buy a new set of dice probably every quarter, right? And so like that's awesome. I love that, right? I love gaming stuff, but I've gotten to the point where I've made it so I have to talk myself into it instead of talking myself out of it, and that's actually been a big shift.
So let's go through the categories that I've brainstormed for this discussion, right? So I want to talk about how we make decisions specifically about buying WotC books. How we think about buying third-party products, how we think about when we buy accessories, minis, dice, whatever, and then how we decide what crowdfunded stuff to back or not back, right? So let's start with WotC books. So WotC has it used to be a couple books a year, and now we're up to half a dozen books a year, more if you count other products, like the dice sets and all that, which I've surrounded myself with, all of these other little things. I've got my Taroka deck over here. I've got my Infernal War Machine, so let's talk about the WotC stuff, right? How do we decide what to get and what not to get? I mentioned that I brought up this conversation a bit on Twitter, and a lot of people were some people were completionists. I'll get it all. I don't have advice for them. If they're going to keep buying it all, that's their choice, right? And more power to them if they can afford it. But for those people who are like, well, I get the things that are of interest to me. I get the things that seem relevant to the interests of me or my players, right? Or there were a lot of I'm really interested in mechanical bits that I can steal, like Xanathar's Guide stuff, or that kind of stuff, right? There was a good amount of people who are like, I have no interest in adventure modules, and a good amount of people who are like, I have no interest in anything Forgotten Realms, and I'm like, that's interesting because that's a lot of what they publish, right? So how do you decide what WotC books to take a pass on, to take it to Sam's direction, go the other way? Not what should you buy, but what should you just pass on and not bother? And I'd love to hear from Jared because he's been too quiet so far.
I've been talking a lot.
Well, I mean, the unfortunate thing is that I do have all of them, but I have also had thoughts on what wouldn't I get if I wasn't getting all of them. There is part of me that is still kind of driven to get everything because I don't want to be, locked out of a conversation or knowing what something is going on. So I still end up, getting more things than I probably would normally. Like you said before, Ravnica really was not something I was particularly that interested in. I got it in part because my daughter is very into D&D now, and she's also very into Magic. So I ended up picking up Ravnica, even though that really wasn't on my radar. On the other hand, Theros I probably would have gotten because of the
Okay.
Greek mythology theme. I think part of this also, and as being a longtime Forgotten Realms fan, as much as most of my 5th edition DMing has actually been Midgard, I tend to want to get all the adventures because they've done a very specific marketing thing. The Sword Coast Adventurers Guide it's very sparse. It describes how the setting exists and does not provide any momentum for it. I don't mean that to be, to sound bad, but there really isn't a lot of momentum in that book telling you this group is attempting to do this. This war is boiling over. It's just, here's the geography of the place. See, this stuff all exists now that the Sundering is over. And if you really want to see something that is talking about what an area looks like currently, you have to get the adventure that has to do with that region. There are so many things dealing with Baldur's Gate you would have no idea from reading the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide. If you wanted to know that there were Bane, Ball, and Merkel for some reason didn't get reinstated to full godhood, you wouldn't know that until about 4 years into 5th edition, because that was, oddly enough, not an important thing to mention in the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing per se, but it is definitely part of their marketing stream that you're not going to get a specific source book in the Forgotten Realms. You're going to get an adventure in an area that will detail that section. So that makes me prioritize that a little bit more as a Forgotten Realms fan. It's just, that is a thing that happens. I personally, I got Ghosts of Saltmarsh, but I was more likely to get Ghosts of Saltmarsh because of the seafaring rules than I was for the adventure anthology. So when it comes to prioritization, I would say it is going to be a little bit different for every person, but I would say if you are a Realms fan, you probably will keep getting adventures if you really want to know what the setting looks like. If you are somebody that just mechanically wants to play D&D, I would basically just suggest getting the core books, the monster books, and the player expansions, things like Xanathars, and skipping the rest unless you really want to. Like, if you really want to play like in Eberron or in Wildmount, just get that book, and then the core mechanical supplements. But I mean, unless you are trying to follow the setting, I don't know. There are people I know that have managed to play through every hardcover, but it is difficult to keep up with these things and actually be playing through them as fast.
Absolutely,
as
and it's become more difficult as they've started doing things like Wildmount or doing things like Theros and Ravnica, because they're not counting that as their normal, like, 2 adventures a year sort of thing. And so the stream is moving faster than I can swim. So that's part of why I keep mashing up adventures, just so I can be like, yeah, I kind of did this, right? But like you, like, I don't know. Now that you mention it, I didn't even think about Ghosts of Saltmarsh. I don't know that I would have bought Ghosts of Saltmarsh if I wasn't doing the podcast or being a completionist, right? Now, I used it, but that's part of that is me saying, hey, there's some pretty good stuff in these other things, even if I wouldn't have normally bought it. Let me see if I can find some way to make use of it, right? And so I tend to do that. Like, I don't know that I will ever run Tomb of Annihilation, but I think the dungeon at the end of it might play in prominently at the end of my current campaign, I'm thinking of ways of stealing that whole dungeon and using it there. So yeah, there's a lot. I'm similar in a lot of ways. I don't know that I would even be buying all the Forgotten Realms adventures just to keep up with the setting, especially since there's no novels and what have you. Like, my compulsion to feel caught up with the setting has increased dramatically. Because they're not really covering the setting anyway. They're just covering the Sword Coast regardless. And so I think I would be the type of person who, if I wasn't getting review copies of everything, who would kind of just not buy the adventures at all until it came time for me to run something. And I'd be like, okay, well, I'm looking to run something. I'm kind of interested in this. here are some options I'll give to my players. They pick which one, and then I'll go buy that, right? Or I'll go read some reviews or listen to the Tome Show and hear what they think about things, right? And get a sense of what's in these books, and then I'll go figure out which ones I want to buy. I just don't know if that's other people's shopping habits, but I think that's where I'm at. Were I not getting them, so.
The other thing that they do as a good marketing strategy, there's two other things that, along with having the idea of each adventure has a sort of chunk of the Sword Coast that's really much more explained. The Sword Coast Adventures Guide was an atlas. It was a static picture of here's this area of the world, and the adventures many of them contain here's the specifics of it, like as Jared was saying. But the other thing that the adventures, a lot of them contain, are rules for other things. Like you mentioned, the Saltmarsh book has like the underwater and the seafaring rules. Avernus has the contracts with demons and devils, right? Out of the Abyss, even way back then, it had the demon lords in it. And Mordenkainen's wasn't out yet, so you didn't have access to the demon lords at that point unless you got Out of the Abyss. And it also has a great map of the Underdark and whatnot.
Well,
and that
even
kind of stuff.
even going back to Princes of the Apocalypse, at that point we didn't have all this extra player options, and they threw a couple of new player races at us, and people were super excited about that.
Some new things in there, right? So that's the other side of that, is even because I don't play in the Forgotten Realms, I never ever have played in the Forgotten Realms. Maybe a couple of sessions in first edition way back in 1987 when the first gray box set came out. But I've never really been a huge Realms fan. I don't dislike it per se. It's just not where I've ever played. So I don't have that sort of connection to it where I want to know what has been updated, what's going on, what's happening. But each of the books has some kind of rule in it, some kind of little set of information that can be helpful. Right. And also often they contain like a gazetteer of a town or of something that's happening, so that you could actually steal a lot of that if you wanted to for your own homebrew world or for your other setting. And so the reason those hardbound books are so enticing, even if you're not an FR fan or an FR player, is that stuff. So there's even some element of part of the reason I get those books and I read them is because I want to see what the thing is that they added to it, right? And then if I decide I'm not going to run that thing, I just get rid of it. But I still have this compulsion to buy it to see what they're. Right? There's also, in terms of Wizards of the Coast, there's an element of this is the official book that talks about how demons and devils associate with mortals. And this is the official book that talks about seafaring stuff. Like, of course, I've got other supplements. I could make my own rules about, and I did, because I started my seafaring game before that book even came out, right? And so, but there's that element. So there's a lot of reasons to buy those things, even if you're not a Forgotten Realms player.
So let's hear.
Not as many compelling reasons, but there's still
Let's hear
a lot
from Tracy. Podcast aside, when you're making a decision about buying a WotC book, what thought process goes through your head about making those decisions?
Right, and I want to be honest, just like you were, that I get a lot of review copies, both digital and through you, physical. So it's hard to know what I would actually do if I wasn't in that situation. But one of the things, and I do this, I have provided some of these videos, but there are a lot of people on YouTube who will do at least partial flip throughs or stuff like that. So it's a great way of seeing what it's actually going to look like if you can't get to a store or something like that, particularly nowadays. And that helps a lot. I like listening to what people say about the book. But a lot of them I probably just wouldn't buy because there hasn't been enough innovation in the physical products. Now, there are good reasons to buy it in terms of they do a lot of play testing. They obviously have multiple stages of editing and stuff like that you can't get in a lot of the other things. Not that, but some of the more established companies will do. So if you're looking for, and balance is such a hard word because what we really care about is the story. But if you care about having had enough other eyes looking at it, then that's a good reason to buy the WotC products. They have a great art budget, obviously, so if that's something, that would be something people might want to look at. But yeah, a lot of it's still very similar to what D&D has been, which is awesome and fine for some folks. But probably isn't where I'm looking to spend most of my money.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot of similarity in some elements of the WotC books, and I think there's some area, like honestly, if I go through each of the hardcover books, I can see where they continue to evolve and experiment with design. And some of those kinds of things, and I find that interesting. I don't know that I would be that person if I hadn't been doing the podcast for so long, right? Where I've gotten used to doing a little bit of analysis,
right?
But I am, and that's of interest to me as well, to see how did they do Storm King's Thunder, and how is that different than Tyranny of Dragons or Tomb of Annihilation. Like, I'm not particularly interested in running some of those adventures, but I really like picking apart the experiments they're doing with design and seeing how they do that as well.
Right. Yeah, and I think we've brought up the completionist things a few times, and I remember back in 4th edition, one of the things that was sometimes like a difficult conversation to have with folks, because there's a lot of people who are completionists, and it's totally, I'm not trying to dismiss it or anything like that, but one of the things is that style of buying sometimes, like there were some people who are completionists who would start arguing about like how certain products shouldn't exist because they have no interest in buying it, and it and I think that kind of holds it back a little bit too. If you want to look at the stuff where story is really starting to look differently, you're going to see that a lot more, I think, in like the Adventurers League stuff or Return to the Glory that they just recently released, where they're trying to play on how orcs are presented even more than I think that they did in a lot of the published adventures. And then I found the best innovations, like my personal, totally subjective opinion, innovations in stories, a lot of times with the ones that they had been working on in collaboration with outside groups. So some of the stuff from the Penny Arcade folks and things like that.
And I think you also can see some of that kind of experimentation and innovation in story when you get outside of WotC and move into third-party products. So I think that's a good transition into that. So Tracy, you were just talking about that. How do you? And I happen to know that you have supported a good number of third-party products, and you're oftentimes pointing me towards interesting and fun little things that I otherwise may not have noticed. So tell me about your experience finding interesting third-party products, some of which you've crowdfunded as well, I believe. But tell me about your approach to that.
Yeah, so like Witch Plus Craft, I think that's how they call it. That's the title of it. It's like Witch plus the + craft. That was a crowdfunded one, and one of the things that's been really useful for me is expanding who I follow on Twitter to be from a bunch of different groups and backgrounds, and so I often will see people will be talking about different types of products that I wouldn't necessarily find through a lot of the other sources that I have for finding products. So, and that book came out wonderfully. I really liked Harlem Unbound, which I know is probably a more, I'm trying to remember, darker hue. Was it Evil Hat that helped them?
No, the second
Not
edition.
Originally.
Yeah, originally Chris self-published the first edition, and the second edition came out through Chaosium.
Chaosium, that's it. Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to remember. That one is also very beautifully done. I found a lot of cool art styles and stuff through those types of books. And then I do like going through DM's Guild and just seeing, I know this is going to potentially sound weird, but I look at who the authors are. If I find an interesting designer from Twitter or someone else, I'll look and see the different things that they worked on And then the anthologies are really great because they list a bunch of people, and then I can keep spiraling outwards and finding.
Yeah, and that tends to be key for me, especially when it comes to both crowdfunded and third-party decisions. Is who's doing it, right? Is it a publisher that I know and trust? Is it specific designers that I know and trust? I have backed a lot of crowdfunded projects that I probably wouldn't have gotten, and some that I will probably never use, but I know those people, or I'm friends with those people, and I want to support them, right? I don't know that on my own, I don't know that I would have bought any of Mike Shea's stuff, but I bought all of them, and I've used them, and I've loved them, and they're fantastic. But I bought them because I'm friends with Mike, not because they particularly sing to me, right? And I want to support him, and he continues to deliver good things that I continue to go back to and I continue to use. So I don't regret any of those. But sometimes, like, I'm friends with somebody, or there's somebody I trust, and then sometimes taking the Sam approach of, okay, but what's my excuse not to buy this? I will oftentimes look at a company who's crowdfunding something and be like, yeah, but they still haven't delivered the last crowdfunded project, right? I don't know that I'm interested in backing this one if they haven't delivered the last one yet. How consistent can they be on that? Now, if it's Cobalt Press, okay, they're going to deliver, so I'm not super worried about them. I recently backed something that they currently have, I think, maybe 3 or 4 outstanding crowdfunded projects. And that made me really nervous. But it had a designer on it that I know from the show and I know from Twitter, and I know him pretty well. And I'm like, but he does good stuff. He's working on this one. I'm going to give it a shot. Maybe I'll regret it. Maybe I won't. Then a pandemic hit and all the work went on pause. And I've been burned a few times crowdfunding things. So I try to be discriminating, but most things have delivered. Sometimes later than I would have liked, but most things deliver. So I tend to, do I trust them? Otherwise, maybe I let it go, right? If it's successful and it does well, usually I can buy the product later. So what about Jared and Sam? What decision process do you go through when it comes to third-party products or crowdfunded products?
Well, I wanted to jump on crowdfunding first because I actually took notes on this because I do have a thing that I kind of worked through in my head when I looked at crowdfund things. And one of the things that I had mentioned before is trying to support things that I don't think are done enough in the industry. So whether that's people that get to design the things, whether it's for marginalized groups or whether it's a theme that doesn't get hit on enough. And the things that I look at in those situations is this telling something from a perspective that we don't usually hear? That will bump it up on my list there. Is this creating something that gamifies something that hasn't been represented as much in gaming? So, for example, I have backed Pasión de las Pasiones because that's a soap opera RPG. I wanted that because you don't see that very often. I also backed the name of it. I wanted to see both of those because normally you're not going to see Wizards or Fantasy Flight jumping on a roller derby franchise. So those are the things that I'm kind of looking for there. When it comes to supporting people that I already know, I also look for, is this something where that person is going to get to have more creative control than they would if they were doing it through someone else? For example, I know Rob Schwalb is going to be able to do things the way he wants to when he does a Shadow of the Demon Lord product versus when he's working for someone else. I love the stuff that he does for other people, but I want to see what happens when you let Rob do Rob, which is, scary, but also interesting. And the other thing is this letting them focus on a part of the game that bigger publishers aren't likely to cover? Part of this, this is like another thing with, I backed Seas of Vidari because Brandis was involved in it, but I also wanted to see what does a campaign look like when the whole campaign setting is islands. And I love piracy and high seas and everything, and I wanted to see that merge with D&D because that definitely seems like something that is something that can go together, but I haven't seen it done
Right.
that per se, so I wanted to see that. When it comes to things like Sam was saying, that which where I'm maybe I shouldn't do this, is it's looking at how many things are promised for what they're kickstarting. And this is something it's actually bitten me on a couple of Kickstarters. There was a Dice Kickstarter that a lot of people were very big on and were very behind. They got very late, and the final product, they promised something like 30-some different varieties of dice, and it's like, logically, if I would have sat and thought about that, it's like, that's not realistic. You can't do that with one Kickstarter. That's not focusing enough to get this done well. And so sometimes we have to kind of take that upon ourselves and go, okay, is this too good to be true? Even if they've done something on a smaller scale, have they done something on this scale that they're trying to do now? And another one that I'll be honest about, I kickstarted because there were a lot of different people that were going to be writing parts of that setting from their culture. So there were people that had a Japanese culture that were going to be writing the Jap. There were people of South Seas origin that were going to be writing those. And the problem is now, because that kind of collapsed, everything is going to be from the lead designer's perspective and not from these marginalized voices. So I'm a lot less excited about that now that this has kind of fallen apart and isn't the way it was originally presented. And part of that's because it was here's a core book, and then if this crowdfunds, we're going to do these other 8 books all based on this one Kickstarter. And again,
Right.
That's too much. You can't change that much.
That's one of the things I think Mike Shea does really smart, right? His Kickstarters are so tight. Like, there's like 3 tiers, and it's just going to be this thing, and we're just going to do this thing really well. He's got it down to a science that I think a lot of people could learn from. So, Sam, what? Oh, go.
Pretty smart model there too, because if they kickstart an adventure, then they might throw on a player's guide and then a book of extra encounters. That's all stuff that you can develop in the same headspace. It's not necessarily doing a whole different product line because you crowdfunded this.
Sam, what's your approach to third-party products and crowdfunding?
So but I have a really good memory. So if I read something from a designer I like, I tend to remember that name, and if I see it somewhere else, I think, oh, I know I like what that person did. I might not even read what it was. Not a well-known designer at this point, but I'll remember, and sometimes I'll just back a project because they're involved, even if I'm not super excited about that, because I want to support that work. And as a creator, not everything you're the best thing you've ever done. That's impossible to do that, right? Everybody within a year, if every time.
Right.
Last, it's not possible for somebody who has super excited about that creative vision and say, oh, I remember up and see it, right? So sometimes I do that. I actually because I don't go for a artist press whatever they're doing. I back it because it's just good. And I have taken at least 2 things from every single book they've published, except for Tales of the Old Margrave, because I didn't back that one, which I was just in a different spot. I don't have any need for the forest thing, and
whereas I have used it extensively, but different experiences, right?
Right. I mean, I played it because they had a Pathfinder version, and I played through a couple of the scenarios as a player in the Path, so I kind of already knew kind of what it was about and everything. And it was really fun. I didn't have a need for it in my 5th edition game, so I just didn't back it. But everything else that they have kickstarted, I think, I have backed and been extremely pleased, and it's just such high quality, and I use it a lot. I mean, I use Tome of Beasts and Creature Codex like, more than I use the Monster Manual almost. Um, and actually, I use those books also in my design work because I say, okay, here's what Wizards of the Coast does with their creatures, right? They have a certain number of different types of special abilities and different types of whatever. Here's how Cobalt Press does this, right? They have sort of different things, different layer actions, different types of special abilities and all that. How could I actually give those things my own flavor, right? So I use it kind of as a creative springboard. That's part of the reason why I use those books so much. So I back Cobalt Press. So there are some things I back like without even really like. There's no question. I love Monte Cook Games' Numenera system. I love a lot of what they do, and sometimes it's not even that I love the content, it's I love even the layout of their books, and a lot of the art that they use is just so great and relative to their setting and what the point they're trying to get across, and their designer notes inside and the way that they formatted everything and how easy it is to read. I just love it. So I back a lot of what they do, even if I don't extensively use it, because once again, I want to support, and they're pretty good at supporting different styles of play, but within a particular type of system. Okay, so I like that. Other than that, I really go for how useful is this thing going to be to me. And that's part of why I've been able to back off a little bit. Now, granted, I've backed probably 280
this year.
Kickstarters
Yeah.
since 2006. Since 2006. Okay?
Yeah.
Since 2006. Okay. But still, that's a lot, right? And I'm, and most of those aren't little $20 Kickstarters, right? Like we're talking about $100 a pop in a lot of cases, right? And I've only been burned about 5 times for various different reasons, and the majority of the things that I've kickstarted, I don't have anymore. I've always given them away, or I've given them to a player, or I've bought them to give them to someone else in the first place, or I got them because I was just supporting someone, right? So part of what I've begun doing is just kind of stepping back and saying, if that's not really going to be useful to me, and I can't think of someone who really needs that, I'm just not going to back it. But there's a lot more. I mean, that's such a simplistic way of talking about that decision. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, right? Like, what does it even mean for me to say it's got to be useful?
And that's even harder.
Like, that's
a much harder decision to make on a crowdfunded project than it is on something sitting on the shelf. Because I can go into the game store and say, is this useful to me like in the next month? And I can probably have a pretty good sense of that. But if I'm going to crowdfund something, I need it to be useful to me a year, maybe a year and a half from now. And it's really hard for me to know whether it's going to be useful to me that far in advance,
Right, but that's
absolutely,
not
absolutely.
Right. See, that's why I say if you flip to asking it from that direction,
I try to be
a lot easier to not back it. It's funny that you say that because walking around a really good game store, I have a hard time putting stuff down. If I pick it up and I flip through it and it looks really good, and I just see 2 little passages or 2 pieces of art that really strike me, I'm like, I'm
no,
buy this.
and
Whereas a Kickstarter, I don't get that opportunity, so I often
and so for the Kickstarter, I do tend to be a little more discriminating because I don't know if it's going to be useful to me unless it's Cobalt Press, unless it's Green Ronin doing D&D, which they haven't done a lot of in 5th edition, or unless it's Torg Eternity stuff, and that's the completionist in me. I look at a lot of Kickstarters and I'm like, I think I could pass. And almost exclusive, like the one time I didn't recently was there was a company doing a whole set of flat plastic minis. I'm like, well, that's going to be useful to me years from now. So whenever this delivers, and it's supposed to deliver this summer, so whenever that delivers, right, that's going to be useful to me. But other than that, like, there's a lot of like, oh, well, that's a kind of a neat set of dice. I'm not I don't need to spend that kind of money on it. With the question of what's the quality going to be? Is it going to deliver? What have you? So, or books or whatever. So yeah, I tend to be a lot more discriminating. Although sometimes I'll still fall into the trap of but the nice thing about Kickstarter, I can decide to back it now, and my wife won't see the credit card statement for months, or for a month, So, I trap myself a little bit that way. So,
or to spin that more positively, it's like giving a present to yourself next year.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk. We're over the time I wanted to go on, and I think we've talked a little bit about accessories already. Anyway, and I imagine the thought process is very similar. Do I need this? Can I talk myself out of it? All that kind of stuff. Is it going to be useful to me? Whether it's dice, whether it's dice trays. I bought a dice tray once that has actually been fantastic. I was never a dice tray person before. Minis. I've talked a little bit about my mini buying habits, but I didn't know if anybody had any sort of additional thoughts on accessories that we haven't already kind of beaten a dead horse over at this point, so we can, before we wrap up.
I like going to kids' toy departments or toy stores or something similar to get some accessories. There's also some like cool dice. I think they're called story cubes or something that they sell there to help kids be able to make stories, and you of course use it for gaming. And then a lot of my card sets and stuff I end up getting at conventions from the exhibitor hall, because people are always making cool little card sets to help either build out dungeons or build out characters.
Nice. Any other additional thoughts on accessories that we haven't already discussed?
Yeah, I mean, I love cards. But cards, I got to tell you, cards run into the problem that Tracy was talking about earlier. You start running into a storage problem, because how do you store cards, right? Because everybody comes out with dungeon geomorph cards, and then they come out with character face cards, and then they come out with treasure cards, and then there's what's in your backpack, and then there's then there's the Taroka deck, and now you've got these adventures. They come with accessory decks, and for Numenera there's like a bazillion beast cards, and like there's like XP cards, and there's creature cards for D&D, and I mean here's I mean it's cards. Almost replaced my minis habit, right? And then I realized, okay, I'm buying these. Right. Am I using them? And the types that I use are creature cards and spell cards. Those are the two I use. The other ones I just find myself not using very much. So my advice is pay attention to, if you're not a completionist, because it's totally, I'm not dogging somebody. I'm not saying you have to, KonMari your everything, right, and get rid of everything. What I'm saying is, if you're a completionist, that's fine. Just own it. You're okay. You're that's awesome. But if you're not, and you're looking for a way to try to, financial situations change because of the pandemic or whatever happens, life happens, then what you need to do is look at how you're using things. And if it's really not being used, you just have it because you like it, decide if that's worth it. Because if worth last time, maybe I won't buy cards next time either. But if it is worth it, then God, by all means, get it. Sorry, Tracy.
Oh no, I was gonna say, and this is maybe why I wanted the storage episode, because there are cards that I know I would use if I didn't have to go through unearthing them every time I wanted to use them. But cards are not easy to store. Built Factor, I think they're now called a different company. They had created a set of cards where, and it was meant more than just for gaming, but they had different personality features, and they made an effort to try to include things that were more diverse. And I really want to use those cards, but I can't figure out how to store them well so that I can just pull them out and suddenly randomly generate some.
Yeah, no, I've been able to keep the card habit impulse that is there every now and then in me. I've been able to keep it in check, and I've kept myself down to the Nord Games critical hit miss fumble decks, and I specifically got a copy of the Taroka deck, and only just a few months ago to use in my Curse of Strahd game. And then, of course, we went to online because of the pandemic before the card reading happened. So, but yeah, I've been able to keep my card habits. Like, I've been tempted, and we've had some episodes where people have been like, "Oh yeah, I use these what is it? Paizo makes like face cards with different character images and whatever." I'm like, "Oh, that's a great idea." And so I tried it for a week or two, and then I realized, yeah, no, this is not something that I'm going to do at the table. I'm not going to remember it. It's not going to, I'm not going to sort through it in time. And so I just stopped doing that, So, yeah. Good.
In the chat that he likes cards. I'm assuming he, perhaps it's a she, I'm not sure. I like cards, so sorry. I like cards for game prep, but I generally find that I use PDFs more than the actual cards. So the reason I mention that is because I actually don't like PDFs very much. I don't use very many PDFs. I like things in a hard copy. The tactile experience is important to me. In fact, even to the point where when I play my game online, but we all roll our dice at home because we're online because of the pandemic. So when we roll our dice at home, but we roll real dice and we're on the honor system because that tactile element is so important to me. And the cards I like holding in my hands. I'm not really good at using a PDF I know they're searchable, whatever, but even in game prep, I want the cards and I can, shuffle them. And if I have a random thing, I can use them versus a PDF. So, but the reason I'm bringing that up is because that's my own proclivity. That's not a judgment call. Like it's not a value judgment. It's not a quality judgment. If PDFs are great for you, that's awesome. I am almost envious because I feel like that's part of that storage issue, right? I think we do need a follow-up episode.
Yeah, no, well, and I can tell you as a mostly I think as a father, right? The PDF thing is huge for me. If I had to come down into my game shelf in the basement and find the book I needed every time I needed to do my game prep or whatever, the game prep oftentimes wouldn't get done. But the fact that I have it on my iPad or on my phone or my laptop or whatever that's with me all the time, and I can be like, hey, I got 20 minutes right now. Let me pull up that PDF or let me pull up that thing on D&D Beyond or whatever, and I can quickly do a little bit of prep and have some things ready to go while I'm thinking about it. That's been huge to me. So I'm with Steal Your Mind on that in terms of if I could get PDFs of everything, having access to that is huge. Like I'm running a Curse of Strahd. I have the Curse of Strahd book right here next to me, but I don't open it at all during my games because I access everything either on my screen in front of me on D&D Beyond or on my iPad in the middle of the game, and I've just stopped using the physical book almost entirely. But we're going on and on the different tangents as we do.
I was just going to throw in, since everybody else was talking about cards, I've ever gotten are the NPC cards for the FFG Star Wars.
I have.
Those are
That's
incredibly
actually what's in
useful.
This box I pulled out.
Yeah, those are incredibly useful for running the game because, especially if FFG line, you can have all of your Imperials together, and you don't have to remember which one of the books had in them. You just have your deck of cards there. The other thing I was going to briefly say is this is not something I would tell everyone to do, but if someone offers a screen, I end up getting a screen. There's no reason for that. Most screens are not that obligatory, but if someone offers a screen, I get the custom screen. However, I would like to say Green Ronin has ideas for screens now because they have handouts. Instead of trying to come up with, what book should we put in here with these, they, like all of the Age games, have handouts for different charts. And it's so useful. And also Star Trek Adventures has different handouts that have things like momentum spends and things like that on them. So that trend I really like. If more people wanted to put, player reference charts or handouts that you can use in with your GM screen.
See, almost my entire Fantasy Age collection is PDFs, so I don't have that experience. So there we go. 1 point for the physical products there. Very good. All right, I think we've hit our sort of last thoughts and accessory conversation. So unless anybody objects, I'm going to go ahead and call that the end of the episode. No objections? All right.
I'd like to say thank you to our guest, Sam. Where can folks find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at DMSamuel, and you can find me online at rpgmusings.com. You can also find me on the Don't Split the Podcast Network at my show, which is called D&D Brief.
And Jarrett, where can folks find you?
All right. Well, my blog is whatdoiknowjr.com. I just recently migrated that. I have my own little website there. You can also, and if you look up Jared Rasher, you can find my YouTube, which I have a whole bunch of actual plays on there. They are not fancy. Many of them are very old, but if you wanted to see them, they are there.
Beautiful.
And we'd also like to say thank you to all of you who support us by being patrons at patreon.com/thetomeshow.
And for supporting us on Amazon and DM's Guild when you shop through the links at tomeshow.com. If you want to get a hold of us at the show, you can email thetomeshow@gmail.com. That goes straight to me, including all the spam that people sign us up for. You can also find Tracy on Twitter. She is at Sarah Dark Magic. That's Sarah with an H. You can find me. I am at Squatch, Squach. The podcast is at The Tome Show, which you totally want to go hang out at because there is a contest from SkullSplitterDice.com going on for another, week or so. And yeah, that's how you get a hold of us.
Or you can find us in
Discord or Facebook or follow us on Twitch.
And thank you for being here and having conversation with us on Twitch as we stream.
Yeah. And that's episode 341, where we figured out how to get the most bang for our buck in this episode of
The Tome. Let's be honest, I could talk another hour.
I had so many
about
other
this.
topics that came up. Steal Your Mind, even mentioned there at the end.
That's
The whole custom DM screen thing. Oh, nice. Very good. And I have been looking for a solution to the custom DM screen, where you slide in your own tables and all that for so long.
Yeah.
And every time I find one, it's always the portrait mode. And I like the landscape DM screens, that are a little.
Yeah, I have.
Did you find one?
Of those.
I've worked so hard to try to find one that I could.
I've had it. I've had it for like 15 years. It was by. Oh, who made it? Mad Dog or so. They still make them, but they make
Hammer Dog.
Hammer Dog. It's not here. It's probably over there. But yeah, no, it's great. It's landscape. It's 4-panel. It's got slots on both sides, so
Beautiful.
I can have player-facing stuff and
that'd be great. I gotta look into that then, because I've looked around every now and then I get a bug and I'll start searching around and all I can find that looks like what I want to do are all portrait mode, and I'm mad about it. So
yeah. Yep.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Well, it is past my bedtime, so I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream. So say goodbye to the stream.
Bye, stream.